I still remember standing in that boardroom, palms sweating against the leather folder containing 6 months of work. Martin Cole sat at the head of the table, phone in hand, scrolling through something that clearly mattered more than my presentation. I'd rehearsed this pitch 100 times. HarperTech, our biggest potential client, sat 3 seats down, watching me with polite curiosity. I opened my mouth to present the digital transformation strategy I'd spent countless nights perfecting. Martin didn't even look up. "This isn't your lane, Elena," he said, voice flat and dismissive. "Stick to your role." The room went silent. My colleagues suddenly found their notepads fascinating. HarperTech's CEO shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I felt my face burn hot, but I kept my voice steady. "I submitted this proposal weeks ago for review." Martin finally glanced up, smirking slightly. "We already have a strategy for HarperTech. Thanks anyway." I gathered my folder, hands trembling slightly, and walked toward the door. As I reached for the handle, I glanced back. My proposal packet sat unopened on the conference table, still sealed in its original envelope. Back at my desk, I pulled up my sent folder with shaking fingers. Every email was there, time-stamped and delivered. September 12th, initial proposal submission. September 19th, follow-up with revised projections. October 3rd, final draft with implementation timeline. Every single message marked as read, but not one response. I'd copied Martin on all of them. He'd seen everything and chosen silence. My coworker, Amanda, wheeled her chair closer, voice barely a whisper. "You okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. She glanced toward Martin's office nervously. "Elena, just be careful. You know how he gets when people try to step outside their box. He takes it personally." I wanted to argue, to say this wasn't about stepping out of bounds, but about doing good work. Before I could respond, Martin's voice carried down the hallway, loud and performative. "You know what kills productivity? Junior staff, thinking they're strategists." Laughter followed, harsh and knowing. Amanda's eyes widened. She rolled back to her desk without another word. I sat there, frozen, as the full weight of his dismissal settled over me like ice water. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, laptop balanced on my knees, staring at the proposal document. Every chart, every projection, every carefully researched recommendation stared back at me. This wasn't amateur work. I'd interviewed HarperTech's team, analyzed their competitors, mapped their pain points with precision. I'd done everything right. Anger burned in my chest, hot and sharp. This wasn't just professional dismissal. This was deliberate sabotage. Martin had blocked my work because he couldn't stand the idea of someone beneath him having a good idea. I opened a new document and started typing. Every project I'd contributed to over the past 3 years. Every client meeting where my insights had been repackaged as someone else's brilliance. Every instance of being told to stay in my lane while watching mediocre ideas get championed because they came from the right person. The list grew longer. 2 pages became 4. 4 became 7. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, cutting through the silence. An email notification. Sender, HarperTech. Subject line, strategy proposal update requested. My heart stopped. I read the email 3 times, barely breathing. "Hi, Elena. We were expecting to review your digital transformation proposal during today's meeting. Unfortunately, we didn't receive the materials. Could you resend at your earliest convenience? We're very interested in exploring your approach." They never got it. Martin had blocked it entirely. My hands clenched into fists. He hadn't just dismissed my work. He'd actively prevented the client from seeing it. This wasn't incompetence. This was intentional. I stared at the email for a long moment, mind racing. I could forward the proposal right now, cut Martin out completely, and let HarperTech see what they'd been denied. But that would be insubordination. Career suicide at Vanguard Dynamics. Or I could play this smarter. I closed the email without responding and opened a blank document instead. If Martin wanted to keep me in a box, fine. But boxes could be rebuilt elsewhere. I started outlining a revised version of the proposal, one that would be legally mine, refined beyond anything Vanguard could claim. My pulse steadied as the plan took shape. Martin thought he'd buried me. He had no idea he'd just given me the foundation to build something he couldn't touch. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a shadow. I tracked every interaction between Vanguard and Harper Tech from the sidelines, watching Martin fumble through meetings with recycled talking points that had nothing to do with what the client actually needed. I documented everything. Meeting notes left carelessly on the printer. Email threads where Harper Tech's team expressed confusion about Vanguard's direction. Internal memos where Martin claimed progress that didn't exist. I saved it all, organized it by date, backed it up in 3 separate locations. Amanda noticed my silence. "You've been quiet lately," she said one afternoon, voice cautious. I shrugged, keeping my eyes on my screen. "Just focus." She hesitated, then leaned closer. "Harper Tech isn't happy. I heard their project manager asking about you specifically." My fingers paused on the keyboard. "What did they say?" Amanda glanced around nervously. "They asked why you weren't in the last meeting. Martin told them you'd moved to a different project."
A lie.
"Of course." "And?" I asked. She bit her lip. "They said they wanted a new approach. Something fresh." I nodded slowly, letting the words settle. Harper Tech was looking for exactly what I could offer. The timing was perfect. I submitted my resignation on a Wednesday morning. No drama, no grand speech, just a simple 2-week notice placed on Martin's desk. He barely looked up from his computer. "Good riddance," he muttered, not even pretending to care. I cleaned out my desk slowly, methodically. A few coworkers stopped by with awkward goodbyes, clearly unsure what to say. Most avoided me entirely, afraid that whatever infection I'd caught might be contagious. Only Amanda hugged me, whispering, "You deserve better." On my last day, as I carried the final box to my car, my phone buzzed. An email from Professor Daniels, my former mentor from grad school. "Heard you're leaving Vanguard. My friend runs a boutique consultancy in Boston. They're looking for someone with your strategic mind. Interested?" I sat in my car, box balanced on my lap, and smiled for the first time in weeks. I typed back, "Very interested." Within an hour, I had a phone interview scheduled. Within 3 days, I had an offer. The consultancy was small, nimble, and respected. More importantly, they valued ideas over hierarchy. I accepted immediately. Martin had tried to bury me. Instead, he'd set me free. My first week at Sterling Advisory felt like breathing fresh air after years underground. The team was small, just 8 people, but every single one of them treated ideas like currency. My second day, I pitched the refined Harper Tech proposal during our strategy meeting. I'd spent weeks rebuilding it from scratch, sharpening every angle, removing any trace of Vanguard's fingerprints. The room went silent as I finished. Then Marcus, the founder, leaned forward with a grin. "That's brilliant. You really think Harper Tech would be interested?" I nodded. I know they would. They were interested before, but it never reached them. He studied me for a moment, understanding flickering in his eyes. "Your old firm?" I met his gaze steadily. "They ignored it. I don't." Marcus glanced around the table. The team nodded in agreement. "All right," he said. "Let's approach them together. You take the lead." My heart pounded as I opened my laptop to draft the outreach email. This was it. No gatekeepers, no Martin, no one to tell me to stay in my lane. Just me and the work I knew was good. As I hit send, one thought echoed in my mind. Vanguard had no idea what was coming. Harper Tech's response came within 2 hours. "Elena, we'd love to see what you've been working on. Can we schedule a call this week?" I set up the meeting for Thursday morning. When the video call connected, I saw genuine relief on their faces. "We were hoping you'd reach out," their CEO, Mr. Patterson, said immediately. "The direction we've been getting from Vanguard has been, frankly, disappointing." I walked them through the strategy, with confidence I'd never felt at Vanguard. Every question they asked, I had an answer. Every concern they raised, I'd already addressed in the proposal. "This is exactly what we discussed in our original conversations," Patterson said, nodding slowly. "This aligns perfectly with our goals." I smiled. I'm glad it resonates. We talked for 90 minutes. By the end, Patterson was animated, excited, asking about implementation timelines and team structures. "We'd like to move forward with a pilot project," he said finally. "How soon can you start?" I glanced at Marcus, who was sitting just off camera, giving me an enthusiastic thumbs up. "We can start immediately." Patterson grinned. "Perfect. Let's make this official." As the call ended, I sat back in my chair, pulse racing. This was real. Harper Tech was mine. At Vanguard, Martin was starting to panic. Amanda texted me 3 days after the Harper Tech call. "Something's happening here. Martin's freaking out. Harper Tech has gone cold on him." I didn't respond, but I smiled. 2 days later, another message. "He's demanding to know where you are. Ask someone to look up your new job. He knows something's up." I could picture Martin pacing his office, jaw clenched, trying to figure out why his biggest prospect was suddenly distant. He'd probably called Harper Tech a dozen times, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. But they weren't returning his calls. They were too busy working with me. That afternoon, Amanda sent a screenshot. An internal email from Martin to the senior team. "We need to identify who at Harper Tech is making decisions. Something has changed in their approach. Find out who they're talking to." I stared at the message, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in my chest.
He still didn't know it was me.
But he was starting to suspect someone was filling the void I'd left behind. He just couldn't prove it yet. I saved the screenshot, adding it to my growing file of documentation. Martin was spiraling, and I hadn't even started. The pilot project with Harper Tech launched 2 weeks later. I used everything I knew about their needs, their industry, and their competitors. More importantly, I knew exactly what Vanguard had gotten wrong. Every misstep Martin had made, every generic recommendation he'd pushed, I corrected with precision. Harper Tech's team was responsive and grateful. "This is night and day compared to what we were getting before," their operations director told me during a check-in call. "You actually understand our business." I deflected the compliment professionally, but inside, I felt vindicated. This was what happened when good work wasn't buried under ego and politics. By week 3, Harper Tech's metrics were already improving. Customer engagement up 12%. Internal efficiency gains are documented and measurable. Patterson sent an email to Marcus, copying me. "Elena is exactly what we needed. Let's discuss expanding this partnership." I was in the middle of drafting a response when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Elena Reyes?" The voice was clipped, familiar, furious. "Martin."
"We need to talk," he said. "Now."
I hung up without a word and blocked the number. He didn't get to demand anything from me anymore. Harper Tech signed a full contract with Sterling Advisory 3 weeks after the pilot launched. The deal was worth 3 times what Vanguard had been negotiating for. Marcus called me into his office the day the contract was finalized, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "You just landed the biggest client we've had in 2 years, he said, shaking my hand firmly. "This is your win, Elena." I smiled, keeping my voice steady, even though my heart was racing. It was a team effort.
He shook his head.
"Don't downplay this. You saw an opportunity, you executed flawlessly, and you brought them in. That's leadership." The rest of the team celebrated that afternoon with champagne and takeout. I felt lighter than I had in years. Meanwhile, at Vanguard, the mood was reportedly grim. Amanda texted me that evening. "Martin just got chewed out by the board. They're asking why Harper Tech went elsewhere. He's blaming lost accounts and unauthorized client contacts. He's spiraling." I read the message twice, then set my phone down. Martin could blame whoever he wanted. The truth was simple. He'd ignored good work, and now someone else was reaping the rewards. Karma didn't need my help. It was doing just fine on its own. 2 months in, Harper Tech's numbers were undeniable. Revenue up 18%. Customer retention improved by 22%. Their quarterly report credited strategic partnership with Sterling Advisory as a key driver of growth. Word spread fast in Boston's corporate circles. I started getting LinkedIn messages from executives I'd never met, asking about my approach. One message stood out. Heard you're the strategist behind Harpertech's turnaround. Impressive work. Industry blogs picked up the story. Boutique consultancy delivers results where larger firms failed. One article specifically mentioned Harpertech's decision to move away from their previous consultant, though Vanguard wasn't named directly. Martin would know. Everyone in the industry would know. I kept my head down, focusing on results rather than publicity. But privately, I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that my work was finally being recognized on my terms. Amanda sent me another update. Board meeting today. Martin's trying to explain why we lost Harpertech. People are asking questions he can't answer. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. And Martin was finally realizing that dismissing me had been the biggest mistake of his career. The whispers at Vanguard grew louder. Amanda wasn't the only one reaching out anymore. Former colleagues started connecting with me on LinkedIn, sending congratulatory messages. One, a senior analyst named Troy, messaged me directly. Everyone here knows what Martin did to you. And everyone knows Harpertech's success is your strategy. People are talking. I asked what they were saying. Martin ignored a brilliant proposal because it didn't come from him. That he let ego kill a major deal. The board's asking hard questions about his leadership. Another colleague, someone I barely knew, sent a more direct message. Martin's trying to claim he had no idea Harpertech was unhappy. But people remember the meeting where he shut you down. It's not playing well. I read the messages with detached interest. I wasn't interested in Vanguard's internal drama, but it was satisfying to know that the truth was surfacing without my intervention. Martin had built his own trap. I just happened to be thriving elsewhere while he fell into it. That week, the board reportedly asked Martin to present a full account review, including Harpertech. He couldn't explain why they'd left or where they'd gone. But the rumors were already circulating. And rumors, once started, were hard to stop. A month later, Troy reached out again, this time with something more concrete. I kept copies of your original proposal emails. The ones you sent Martin before that boardroom disaster. I thought you might want them as proof you submitted everything properly. I met him for coffee the next day at a quiet place far from Vanguard's office. He handed me a USB drive. Everything's on here. Timestamps, read receipts, the works. I figured if Martin ever tries to spin this differently, you'd have documentation. I thanked him, genuinely moved. Why are you doing this? He shrugged. Because what he did was wrong. And because good people shouldn't get buried by bad leaders. I took the USB home and reviewed everything that night. It was all there. Proof that I'd submitted the proposal weeks before the meeting. Proof that Martin had seen it and ignored it. Proof that Harpertech had asked for it specifically and been told it didn't exist. I didn't know if I'd ever need this documentation, but having it felt like insurance. A safeguard against any attempt to rewrite history. Martin had tried to erase my work once. I wasn't going to let him do it again. Harpertech's success continued to accelerate. By month 4, they'd expanded their contract with Sterling Advisory, bringing us in for a full-scale digital overhaul. Patterson personally requested that I lead the project. You've earned our trust, he said during the contract signing call. We want you at the center of this. The expanded deal was worth more than Vanguard's entire annual consulting revenue. Marcus was ecstatic. The team celebrated. And I quietly updated my portfolio with results that spoke louder than any title ever could. Meanwhile, Martin was scrambling. Amanda told me he'd started offering discounts to potential clients, trying to undercut competitors to salvage his reputation. He was calling old contacts, making promises he couldn't keep, desperate to show the board he could still close deals. But the damage was done. Harpertech had become a cautionary tale in the industry. Not just because they'd left Vanguard, but because they'd thrived so dramatically after leaving. One evening, I received an email from Patterson's executive assistant. Harpertech is considering a long-term strategic partnership with Sterling Advisory exclusively. Mr. Patterson would like to discuss terms next week. I read the email 3 times, letting the magnitude sink in. This wasn't just a contract. This was validation. Total, undeniable, permanent validation. The story hit the industry blogs 2 weeks later. How one consultant transformed a stalled partnership into a case study in success. The article didn't name me initially, but it detailed Harper Tech's journey from frustration with a large consultancy to explosive growth with a boutique firm. By the second paragraph, my name appeared. Elena Reyes, formerly of Vanguard Dynamics, spearheaded the turnaround with a strategy her previous employer had reportedly overlooked. The article was polite, professional, and devastating. It praised Sterling Advisory's responsiveness and my innovative approach to client-centered strategy. It noted that Harper Tech had tried to work with Vanguard but found the partnership unresponsive to their specific needs. I didn't give an interview for the piece. I didn't need to. The results spoke clearly enough. But the damage to Vanguard's reputation was immediate. Martin reportedly called the publication, demanding a retraction, claiming the article was biased and factually incorrect. They stood by their reporting. Amanda sent me the link with a single message. He's losing it. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The narrative was out of Martin's control now. And the truth, patient and persistent, had finally caught up with him. Martin tried subtle sabotage next. He called mutual contacts, suggesting I'd acted unethically. She stole client information, he told one industry peer, who immediately reported it back to me. He sent vague emails to other potential clients, implying Sterling Advisory had questionable business practices. Every attempt backfired. I documented everything meticulously. Every email, every proposal, every interaction was time-stamped and saved. When one client reached out asking about Martin's claims, I calmly shared the timeline. I resigned professionally, fulfilled my notice period, and only approached Harper Tech after leaving Vanguard. Here's the documentation if you'd like to review it. The client thanked me for my transparency and signed with Sterling Advisory 2 weeks later. Harper Tech heard about Martin's tactics and sent a formal letter to Vanguard's board. Any further interference or misrepresentation regarding our partnership with Sterling Advisory will result in legal action. Martin's attempts to undermine me weren't just failing. They were actively damaging what remained of his credibility. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just kept working, kept delivering results, and let Martin's desperation speak for itself. Integrity, I was learning, was its own defense. Vanguard's board called an emergency meeting. Amanda got the details secondhand from an assistant who owed her a favor. They're reviewing Martin's performance, specifically his handling of client relationships and internal talent management. Your name came up. I felt a flicker of something, not quite satisfaction but close. Justice, maybe. Or just the natural consequence of poor leadership finally being acknowledged. The board reportedly asked pointed questions. Why had Harper Tech left? Why hadn't the proposal been forwarded? Why was a junior strategist's work dismissed without review? Martin tried to deflect, blaming market conditions, client unpredictability, budget constraints. None of it held up under scrutiny. The numbers were clear. Harper Tech had thrived after leaving Vanguard. Other clients were asking questions. Revenue projections were down. Meanwhile, I was at Sterling Advisory, leading a team presentation for a new client. Focused, calm, doing exactly what I'd always been capable of when someone actually gave me the space to work. That evening, Marcus pulled me aside. The board at Vanguard is apparently in chaos. Thought you'd want to know. I nodded slowly. Thanks for the heads up. He studied me. You okay? I smiled. Better than okay. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Harper Tech's quarterly earnings call mentioned Sterling Advisory by name, crediting our partnership as a key factor in their digital transformation success. Patterson gave a brief interview to a trade publication, praising our work and subtly referencing their previous consulting relationship as a mismatch in vision and execution. The implication was clear. The quote circulated quickly. Within days, 3 more companies reached out to Sterling Advisory, specifically requesting to work with me. I was building a reputation, not through politics or positioning, but through results. Quietly, methodically, undeniably. At Vanguard, the pressure on Martin intensified. Amanda told me the board was compiling a full review of lost accounts over the past year. Harper Tech was the most visible, but there were others. Clients who'd left quietly, frustrated by lack of responsiveness or cookie-cutter strategies. Martin had been so focused on maintaining control that he'd lost sight of actually serving clients. Now it was catching up to him. I continued documenting everything just in case. Not because I planned to use it, but because I'd learned the hard way that truth needed evidence. And if Martin tried one more desperate move, I'd be ready. But mostly, I just kept working. Because the best revenge wasn't confrontation. It was a success. Martin called an emergency board meeting to present Vanguard's plan to win back HarperTech. Amanda managed to get me notes from someone who attended. It was a disaster. Martin opened with confidence, presenting a revised strategy he claimed would address HarperTech's needs. But the plan was generic, surface level, nothing like the tailored approach I'd built. Worse, he clearly didn't understand what HarperTech actually wanted. The board asked questions. How does this differ from what we initially proposed? Martin stumbled. What specific outcomes are we targeting? He cited vague metrics. Do we have any indication HarperTech would be receptive? Silence. Then one board member asked the question that cut through everything. Where is Elena Reyes's original proposal? The one she submitted before she left. Martin's face reportedly went pale. That proposal wasn't viable for our client engagement model. Another board member spoke up. But HarperTech specifically requested it, didn't they? And now they're working with her directly. The room went quiet. Martin tried to recover, but the damage was done. The board knew. Everyone knew. He'd buried good work because of ego, and now the company was paying the price. The meeting ended without resolution. Just questions Martin couldn't answer and a credibility gap he couldn't bridge. 2 days later, HarperTech made it official. They sent a formal letter to Vanguard's board, copying their legal team. The letter detailed the timeline of their relationship, noting that they'd specifically requested Elena Reyes's proposal and were told it didn't exist. It included email evidence of their requests and Vanguard's evasive responses. The letter concluded by stating that HarperTech had found the strategic partnership they needed elsewhere and that any further contact from Vanguard would be considered harassment. Troy sent me a copy. Thought you'd want to see this. It's circulating internally. Martin's finished. I read the letter carefully, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Not sadness for Martin, but for what could have been if he'd just listened. If he'd seen people as partners rather than threats. The board reportedly requested all documentation related to my original proposal. Troy provided his copies, complete with timestamps proving I'd submitted everything properly and that Martin had ignored it. The evidence was irrefutable. Every email, every draft, every revision showed that I'd done my job correctly. Martin had simply chosen not to forward it. There was no defense, no spin that could change the facts. The truth was finally completely, undeniably out. The press release hit the next morning. HarperTech partners exclusively with Sterling Advisory for Digital Transformation Initiative. The release praised our work, specifically mentioning my leadership and the tailored approach that had driven their success. It noted, diplomatically but clearly, that they'd moved on from a previous consulting relationship that hadn't met their needs. Local business publications picked it up immediately. By noon, it was trending in industry newsletters. Boutique firm outperforms corporate giant in high-profile client win. One article included a sidebar comparing HarperTech's growth metrics before and after switching consultancies. The numbers told the story better than any words could. Martin tried damage control, issuing a bland statement about Vanguard's commitment to client success and ongoing portfolio strength. No one bought it. The story wasn't about corporate messaging. It was about competence, about listening, about what happens when good work gets ignored and then flourishes elsewhere. My phone rang that afternoon. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Elena. Martin's voice was tight, desperate. We need to meet. Please. I kept my voice calm. There's nothing to discuss, Martin. I hung up and blocked the number. Again. He'd had his chance to listen months ago. Now it was too late. Vanguard's board voted 3 days later. Martin Cole was removed from his position as CEO, effective immediately. The official statement cited strategic misalignment and failure to maintain client relationships consistent with company values. It was corporate speak for He screwed up, and everyone knew it. Amanda called me that evening, voice hushed. It's chaos here. Martin cleaned out his office this morning. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. Just left. I felt a strange emptiness hearing it. Not satisfaction, exactly. Just the quiet acknowledgement that consequences had finally arrived. How's everyone else? I asked. Relieved mostly, Amanda said. People are finally talking openly about how he operated. All the dismissals, the ignored ideas, the credit stealing. It's like everyone exhaled at once. We talked for a few more minutes before I hung up. I sat in my apartment that evening, looking out at the city lights, thinking about the past 6 months. The humiliation in that boardroom felt like a lifetime ago. I'd been so angry then, so desperate to prove myself. Now, I didn't need to prove anything. The work had done that for me. Martin was gone, but not because I destroyed him. He'd destroyed himself. I just refused to let him take me down with him. Sterling Advisory offered me a partner position 2 weeks later. You've brought in our biggest clients, mentor half the team, and set a standard for client service we want to build on, Marcus said during the offer meeting. We want you in leadership. Permanently. I accepted with gratitude. Not just for the title, but for the trust it represented. Harper Tech extended our contract for another 3 years, with expanded scope and budget. Patterson sent a personal note. You gave us exactly what we needed when we needed it most. That kind of partnership is rare. Thank you. Other clients followed. Word spread that Sterling Advisory, and specifically Elena Reyes, delivered results without drama or ego. My calendar filled with consultations, strategy sessions, pitches. I started mentoring younger consultants, sharing lessons from my own experience. Document everything, I told them. Not because you expect betrayal, but because good work deserves proof. Stay professional, even when others aren't. And remember, competence is the best response to dismissal. They listened intently, asking questions, taking notes. I saw myself in their eagerness, their hope, and I made sure they knew their ideas mattered. Meanwhile, Martin reportedly struggled to find new positions. His reputation had taken hits he couldn't recover from. I didn't follow his career. I didn't need to. My focus was forward, not back. 6 months after that humiliating boardroom moment, I sat in my new office at Sterling Advisory, sunlight streaming through windows I'd earned. My name was on the door, gold letters on frosted glass. Partner, client strategy. I'd built something real here. Not through politics or games, but through work that mattered and people who valued it. Harper Tech's success story became a case study taught in business schools. How client-centered strategy drives measurable growth. My name was in the case study. My approach was analyzed and praised. The proposal Martin had dismissed was now required reading. I thought about him sometimes, wondered if he'd learned anything. Probably not. Men like Martin rarely did. They moved on to the next position, the next company, carrying the same arrogance that had destroyed them before. But I'd learned that silence wasn't weakness. That patience was strategic. That good work, given time and space, would always outlast ego. I mentored 3 junior consultants now, all brilliant, all hungry to prove themselves. I made sure they knew their ideas mattered, that their voices counted. That competence wasn't a threat, it was an asset. The victory wasn't revenge. It was this, sitting in an office I'd earned, doing work I loved, surrounded by people who respected what I brought to the table. Martin had tried to keep me small. Instead, he'd given me the push I needed to become everything he'd feared I could be. And that, more than any title or client win, was the real triumph. I smiled, opened my laptop, and got back to work.